Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, you've had a distinguished career, your career, foreign service, but your department is responsible for giving us knowingly false information, and I want to just go over it quickly. As the committee did its oversight over the PRM's assistance, we were told, and I'd ask that she be given copies of this, and I'll ask that it all be placed in the record. And I'll quote, this was in January of 2023, and again in December of 2023. Legal assistance, PRM, has not funded and does not fund legal representation or counseling related to immigration proceedings. Again, later in December, from the government of Mexico, PRM does not fund legal representation or counseling related to U.S. immigration proceedings, and legal assistance provided to those in Mexico is solely for the Mexican legal processes. At this moment, under, make sure I say it right, under the rules of Title 18, or U.S. 18, Title 1001, is that a true statement, either of those?
Congressman, PRM funds.
Ma'am, that's a yes or no. It really is. Are those true statements?
Yes.
Okay. Then if you'd please give her a copy of this. Are you aware of this packet that was used throughout 2023?
Yes.
Does it limit to legal activities in Mexico, or does it on pages 9, 10, and 11 clearly advise people on how to get asylum in the U.S.?
This packet of information, Congressman, was not funded by PRM. It was funded by the UN Refugee
Was this
Agency.
organization at this time under funding from the United States?
The organization was. This packet was not produced with U.S. funding.
One of the problems with the title I mentioned to you is that it makes it a crime to use tricks or mislead. Were you aware of this activity under other funds while you were funding this organization?
Congressman, this slide deck and these briefings were begun before I was confirmed as Assistant Secretary.
Ma'am, they were going on during these days of those statements. Right in the middle of it, the packet says May of 2023 was the revision. I'm going to go back to the original question because I think it's the most important question for you today as a Senate confirmed officer. Were you aware of this packet?
I became aware of the packet when we were producing documents for the Congress in response to their requests. I had not seen it before then.
What disciplinary actions or other activities do you envision when Congress has been told something in writing that is untrue, and then you discover this?
Congressman, again, I repeat, this packet was not funded by PRM. We became aware of it when the—
Ma'am, I'm going to make something very clear to you. The intent of Congress is not to use the fungibility of money to give an organization that goes out with the people that you are funding, and those people and that organization do something inconsistent with what you tell Congress and what your mandate is. Money's fungible. As long as you give to this organization, which I understand you're still funding around the world, and they have a dual purpose, and they use that dual purpose to do something that Congress clearly doesn't want. Nowhere in this deck, we'll call it UN funded for a moment just to humor you, nowhere in this deck does it suggest that you can seek refuge in Mexico, which under international law you have not only a right to, but an obligation to. Isn't it true under international law that every refugee in Mexico, if they're not Mexican, is by definition eligible to seek refuge there, and Mexico is at least one of the countries before the United States? So at a time in which every individual handed this had traveled into Mexico, a country that would have required visas if they, and or a claim of asylum to let them in, they were allowed in only because your organizations, along perhaps with the UN, was in fact funding their trip to the United States. In other words, you were part of conduiting people to circumvent international law. Every one of those people, Haitian, Chinese, whatever, you're so proud of helping, had a right, and Mexico had an obligation. We circumvented that at federal taxpayers' expense so they could come to the United States, where we are spending $150 billion a year in support of them. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Issa, and we will do further rounds if you feel as though you have more questions on it. Got it. I now recognize Ranking Member Crow.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I had a line of questioning, but I feel really compelled to correct the record here because this last line of questioning was inaccurate and misleading in so many ways. First of all, this organization, I think people deserve to know that this organization that was the subject of the last round of questioning, HIAS, was actually founded in the wake of the Holocaust. Right after the Holocaust, the purpose of this organization was founded to help Jewish folks in Europe escape the pogroms of the Soviet Union, right, and actually help bring them to safety after the Holocaust. That's number one. Number two, at no time has the U.S. funded the specific programs that were at issue here, right? And there's a very big difference between funding an organization and then specific lines of effort. Number three, the information itself about navigating the Mexican immigration system actually is available on, wait for it, the CBP website of the United States, right? That is publicly available information on the Customs and Border Protection website. And then the last thing is, I just find it very disingenuous, frankly, when my colleagues will question somebody or come after a witness based on transcribed interview testimony and transcripts that they literally have refused over and over again to make public. Taking an interview of a witness and then refusing our requests to make that public so that the public can actually see the full context and the full meaning of what happened in those interviews, instead cherry picking certain parts to attack a witness. So I just wanted to level set that. And then Ms. Noyes would love to give you a minute or two of time to actually address the issues, since you didn't really have that opportunity to do so just now.
Well, thank you, Congressman, and I appreciate that, and I do want to reiterate the United States government did not fund the production of these slides. The United States government did fund activities and programs in Mexico to inform immigrants within Mexico of the ability to seek asylum. And in fact, the Mexican Asylum Agency has grown by 500%. Mexico is now one of the top asylum receiving countries in the world with over 140 applicants, and all of that has happened as a result of the assistance that has been appropriated by the Congress for PRM, and it has been very successful. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from any of the other witnesses on this? Okay. And just to be really clear, since my colleague referenced a component of U.S. law about knowingly making false or misleading statements to the U.S. government, you have at no time made false or misleading statements to the U.S. government.
That is correct.
All right. Thank you. Can you actually, I do think it's important, actually, this organization that has such a important history, HIAS, can you just tell folks a little bit about it and what this organization does?
Well, I wouldn't want to speak for HIAS, but they are an important implementing partner for the United States. We have programs with them in several countries around the world. They are also one of the 10 resettlement agencies that help in the resettlement of refugees arriving legally in the United States after fleeing persecution and substantial vetting and processing overseas. They conduct programs on issues like preventing gender-based violence, providing support for medical services and other types of activities. They are a humanitarian agency, as you said, Congressman, founded in response to the pogroms in Russia, initially to help Jewish refugees, but then they have expanded their activities to support refugees and vulnerable people around the world.
And did this organization, in fact, do so, help Jewish refugees escape persecution?
Indeed. I mean, I can't speak for them. I don't know their entire history,
their
but it is
history,
a
yeah.
long and distinguished history.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Crow. I'm going to wait until round 2 to ask questions, and I yield my time to Representative Issa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess sometimes you have to respond to the correcting of the record by correcting the record. In May, the department told Chairman McCall that the deck was used at a PRM-funded legal orientation sessions, the sessions provided by HIAS or HAS. So we funded the sessions in which they used the dock. Would you like to correct the record that we didn't fund it? If you fund the meeting and they use the deck, why is it and how is it that you can say you're telling us without trickery or any kind of misleading that this wasn't funded or at least enabled by the United States government, ma'am?
Again, Congressman, we did not fund the production of the deck, but that it is accurate that the deck was used in briefings where we were also informing migrants about the ability to seek asylum in Mexico.
Ma'am, it's wonderful that you're a great diplomat, because diplomats tell people to go to hell and make them pack and look forward to the trip, I guess. Because there is no truth in what you just said. It is extremely clear that if a group, I don't care who printed it or handed it out, a group you were funding waters and transportation, everything else, to bring to an event, host the event under the color of the United States of America, not the United Nations, and then you say, well, we didn't fund it, they got the money fungibly from somewhere else. Ma'am, there's not one American that would believe that. And by the way, to look at an organization and say, well, in the past, it had a great history, no question at all. My general counsel and one of my best friends was a refusenik that this organization probably helped his family get out. That's not what this organization's doing today, and it's not what you're paying for. If you fund them and your people see them handing out this deck, and pages 9, 10, and 11 are clearly not telling, in fact, not one bit of this document helps them stay in Mexico or implies they should. It makes it very clear that, in fact, this is how you circumvent law, by what you say to get into the United States. That is just the truth. And I appreciate Ranking Member Crow wanting to correct the record, but the record is the United States government paid for sessions in which knowingly this was used, and you still stand behind the statements made to this committee that you do not do it, and you were making those statements while people were handing this out at U.S. government paid for events. Is that correct? Okay. So why is it that I'm going to ask you just one more time, because maybe Mr. Crow will see the light. Why is it you think that that is not somehow using funds if you bring people in and say, here, go ahead and use this deck that tells them how to get to America, and then you tell us that you don't in any way facilitate it?
Please turn your microphone on.
Sorry about that. We didn't fund the production of the slide deck. It was created in order to provide information to migrants who were participating in the Remain in Mexico program, the Migration Protection Protocols. PRM stopped funding for HIAS in Mexico in 2023. We do no funding for the agency.
Okay. Lastly, and the chairman's been very kind to give me this time, can you give this committee assurance today that no organization attends U.S. government-funded events in which these migrants are made available and provides similar information today?
Congressman, we are fully cognizant of the requirements in the 2024 Appropriations Act, which stipulates that. We are in full compliance with that. In fact, I sent letters to the heads of all international organizations that we fund to inform them of that stipulation. And so, yes, I can say unequivocally that such briefings are not happening with U.S. government funding.
Okay. Since I represent a border district, I have about 80 miles of the Mexican border east of San Diego. I go to that constantly. I have led many members of Congress and attorneys general and so on to them. I have stood at the fence and listened to U.S. government-backed NGOs, including Catholic Charities, talk through the fence and advise people on what to say as they're irregularly entering the United States. So I wish I could believe that you enforced your letters, but I appreciate that you say you've sent letters with that guidance. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. Hopefully the record of correcting the record is now complete.
Thank you, Mr. Issa. It was an interesting dialogue to me. I understood it to be, they had an audience of people, and maybe they didn't tell the audience of people, this is what's in the deck, but hey, come up here and by all means give this instruction, and you're also getting US dollars for something different, is kind of how I understood that. I'll have my own time for questions, but it does not seem above board. I recognize Ms. Dean for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and